unpause the video so it's not just my face. Okay, paste the note. And hold on that. We can take it with us. Paste the chat in the. I pasted notes in the chat. Has like a low-key crowd today. Suddenly a bunch of people. Cool.
Hey, folks.
Hello, hello. All right. I think this is enough people to get started on. Other folks can join. I've put in the Zoom chat the link to the HackMD notes. Looks like folks are starting to add themselves on here. And I will go ahead and yield the floor to Josh so he can talk about conformance next steps. Take it away, Sure.
All right, I'll be quick because I feel like we just touched on a lot of these. So the conformance testing suite, it definitely covers a lot of it covers all of the expected HTTP requests and how they should work according to the spec. But what we're seeing is that almost all registries aren't conforming, and what we're hearing from a lot of people is that in several cases, some of these endpoints will never be implemented. And so I think the conclusion, and I just want to like pass this by everyone, I think the conclusion that we came up with last week or the week before is that certain tests, the tests will be grouped into categories, and only the bare minimum by default will be run that tests for pool functionality. And by having pool functionality, you're considered a conformant registry. And then if you export certain settings like an environment variable test push, test, whatever the other two categories we want to call, it would then run the requests that are scoped to that category. And when you're submitting for certification, you could actually denote that your registry has extra functionality that is defined in the spec, but it's not necessarily the case that you're not conformant if you don't do all of them. So does that sound fine to everyone? Because I know, some registries support some things more than others. And
Do you have a mock-up of what this would look like? I think a visual would help here.
no, I can work on that, and I'll work on getting the request grouped, and I'll send a note to the email chain that's going out about this. But you and Derek had put something in the mailing list that I think was a pretty good visual. Like Derek specifically had a list of 4 categories that I thought made a lot of sense. But yeah, I'll group them out and write a proposal, but just wondering if that sounded good.
Yeah, I think the goal would be, we don't want a registry that doesn't implement something that it makes sense for them to not look like they're not conformant. And we don't want a registry that's doing something that's part of the spec, shouldn't necessarily look like it's doing something super special. It's just a matter of, if I'm looking for certain behavior from registries, this is what each of them support. I don't know if in the conformance thing, we want to list other features that are not in the spec. I think we don't want to turn this into an advertising thing. Maybe there's a link that goes to the registry's overview page, but I think it's just a matter of, related to the spec, there's varying degrees of implementation. In fact, it'll be a great base for, as Vincent, if Vincent could ever get his optional capabilities thing done, that list is going to expand exponentially. So that'll be awesome.
Yeah, that's what I was going to comment on. Like, it seems like basically we could even like retro define like the extra capabilities as, you know, optional extensions or maybe required extensions, and then just leave ourselves room moving forward very quickly to say, okay, we can write additional conformance specs for each of the new optional features and then have the system auto check them.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Does it make sense then to maybe take a pass over the spec itself and define it like that?
And we've always said that this is a good forcing function to clean up some vagueness in the spec. So I think that's a, like, you've become the facilitator for that, as to show, you know, where these things are, and then we could, you know, oh, we didn't think about that one. Let's
Yeah. Well, I think what Joey's describing makes a lot of sense, but it should be written that way. The capability, like right now, it's just here's all the endpoints. So yeah, let me think about that. I'll ping you, Joey and Steve. I'll ping you offline to carry on. And then this kind of leads into so we have we have a dashboard that we put up that is testing all of these registries. And I kind of don't like it for a few reasons. One, it's all my personal credentials, and I'm paying a few pennies for some of these cloud things. And then the other thing is, I think the registries should be having more availability to change how the test runs on their end. So and somebody had suggested this, but does it make sense for that dashboard to go into the Open Containers org and be hosted on opencontainers.org URL? I mean, I don't really.
And in comes Amy.
What's that?
And in comes Amy. I just watched her face popped in just in the right time.
What did you need me for?
We need your credentials for everything. No.
I do not want any credentials. I'm not liable for anything.
You say that now, but no, what actually is the topic thing? Sorry, I dropped in late.
About the conformance dashboard, to have something like conformance.opencontainers.org, and it hosted somewhere that is drawing from a budget that comes out of the OCI budget, not
right.
pocket.
What exactly are we asking about, though? Is it just hosting static HTML that could be on GitHub, or is there
yeah, so the way it works right now is just a GitHub. I have all the links in the HackMD GitHub pages. GitHub Actions actually provides the green or red status. So really, we're talking about DNS, someone setting up DNS, and then migrating the repo from Blood Orange to Open Containers, and someone setting up credentials and GitHub Actions secrets.
What is it doing? I thought we were just submitting HTML back that says, here's the results of our tests. I missed something here.
It actually runs a test too.
Like every week, every day, every hour? What does that mean?
Every single hour for every single registry. So it actually, it's interesting because if you, you know, like I'd like to work with the registry, someone configure it in such a way that pulls from master from Quay or pulls from master from something. And for the live ones, it's running against the live site. So if ACR were to fix some result in the table, it would show up green the next hour.
How do we do this for Kubernetes?
What's that?
Does Kubernetes work this way, like the Kubernetes conformance tests?
No, not at all. This is something that came out of me trying to experiment with the conformance test working against several places. But like, I think it makes sense for open containers for it to have their, does it, you know, I don't think this is official conformance results, or we could talk about merging this with the OCI conformance or OCI certification repo and actually make it part of that process and build the table out from people who have submitted conformance results.
Yeah, I'm asking kind of like the meta question of, should these things be automated and automatically run? Are some of these features, like for the online registries, it makes sense. What do you do for Harbor? What do you do for Quay, the open source one?
Yeah, well, I do need help. I do need help for Harbor and Quay. I think it's going to require actually deploying it somewhere and then pointing to it. But
I should note, just for the project Quay side, we're planning to add it to our CI so that if it doesn't pass green, we can't merge.
Awesome.
So that's our plan. And the only reason we haven't done that yet is because we don't support, like, so I've run the conformance test suite locally on Quay, and with, I think, one exception where we're returning like a 202 instead of a 204 or something. The rest of the issues seem to be primarily related to the fact that we don't yet support the OCI manifest format, which we're working on right now.
Right.
So the plan is that as part of that work, we're going to integrate the conformance tests and into our CI pipeline, but it does require also us being able to selectively ignore the test on deletion of blobs, like we've had this conversation. So I personally feel that that's probably the best approach for non-hosted solutions, is they should probably either have it part of a CI or report the results in some standard way. And then maybe we simply have the links in the overall table, say this is the report for this particular project, click here to go to the CI results, or perhaps something like that. And then it's up to the project to report it. And that way we don't have to worry about checking it out, building it, running it. And then the hosted services, obviously we can just run against them.
I guess that's my question, is how do people feel? Should we be running them against the live services at the expense of just, running compute continually just for the sake of it? I mean, it's interesting. It's cool. Is it?
I didn't realize you're such an environmentalist, but I think we should, no, I think maybe the table is drawn from the static results that are submitted. Like if there's a table that's official and Quay is failing on master, that doesn't mean that the released version of Quay is a non-conformant version. So I think they should be responsible for submitting their results to the open containers thing, and then the table maybe sources from that. I do think there is value in continuously running, especially on hosted services. So maybe we drop the open source pieces out of it and just do hosted services. And if you're really concerned about the environment, we can run it once a day. But I think I don't think it makes sense to be in my GitHub org. Is all that's
No, that makes perfect sense.
Why I bring it up.
That makes perfect sense. We should absolutely take the stuff you've got there and promote it. It's just like once a day seems perfectly fine, but it's funny because we have these conversations. I keep on arguing against ACR, but it's like, I would want to make sure that the non-hosted ones have just as much accuracy, visibility, and it doesn't mean that we should have to stand up Harbor every hour or once a day just to run the conformance testing. At the same token, I don't know how we hold them. That's why I'm asking what was done in the other places. Vincent, you're awfully quiet over there. You got stronger wine tonight?
I'm actually almost done with this glass of wine, and it's the last wine in the house. I guess I'm quiet.
You are bad at planning, Vincent.
Amy?
So
I will show you the golden retriever that I'm hanging out with. See, you get wine, I get puppies. No, more saliently, should we take this back into email to be able to walk through like all of the various details here? Is this something we should be talking about here?
Fair enough.
Yeah, I can send a detailed email about it. No more. I guess my final question on that is does this need to then go through the whole process, like Umochi or us to actually become a repo, or is that the same process?
Not quite the same project, because I mean this is almost like how we have a project for the content that's on opencontainers.org.
Right. I mean the other option is the source for that can make its way into the OCI conformance repo, which already exists. So
why don't we just break off, just to your point, like to you and Amy, why don't we just break this off to a separate conversation, because there's the bigger piece that I was asking, and it sounds like people are supportive. That's why I was asking if should we be running these online or should teams submit, and what's the standard that others have done, and not just for being green to the planet. It's just
I'm
just it's a good one. It's a good example. It's just an interesting question.
I'll send out an email that outlines exactly what I'm talking about. My only other topic, and then I'll pass the baton, is I want to publish. Maybe we just don't do it, but I think that the conformance test should be published as an image. And I know Vince was talking about potentially an OCI Quay org, but then it's like, are we choosing? Does that become a political thing? Do we want to publish to multiple places? I don't care. I'm going to drop the topic. Someone give me credentials and I'll upload the thing.
So I was following up with them offline, with Josh offline. It just seemed like the GitHub registry should be perfect for it, because that's where the source code is. Apparently there's some issue they're having with anonymous one. So I've been following up with that team to what's going on. They're not using ACR behind yet. So I can't really fix something ourselves. So I'm trying to find out what's going on there. Then the other was just
the GitHub publish is actually perfect because it's already there. But the actual CI and the repo is on Travis, so we can push it wherever we want. So I'm done with conformance stuff. I will return at some later date.
Josh out. Okay, he just shuts off his camera. I'm out of here.
Done.
All right. So how does this work? Do I go next, or does somebody else want to go now?
Yeah, I'm going to try and type up some notes from that.
Go, Joey, go.
But yeah, Joey with the early pub sub early proposal.
Yeah, let me put a link. It's already in the notes, but I'll also put it in the chat. So here's the link. Hi everyone, I'm Joey. I'm the tech lead of the Quay team. I'm also former co-founder of it. Just wanted to give a little bit of background on the proposal. The proposal is fairly in-depth and detailed, and I'm not going to walk through the entire thing right now because that would be a massive waste of time. But I just wanted to give a little bit of background as to why I'm proposing this as an extension to OCI, what problems it would solve, and a high-level description of how it works. So basically, the problem that I feel needs to be solved, and I think a bunch of other people tend to agree with, is today we have a lot of tooling that wants to be able to operate on changes that occur in registries. This runs the gamut from things like security scanners all the way to things like Spinnaker, where a new tag gets pushed and you want to scan that tag, or you want to take some action in response. Traditionally, this has been solved through a couple of different ad hoc solutions. A bunch of the different registries provide webhooks where you can register like a callback when, say, a new tag is pushed, but they're obviously kind of ad hoc. Each registry has its own format, its own support. The kind of events that can be used are different. We also have a general solution, which is to make use of the catalog and tags APIs, but those require polling and pulling. And in our experience on the Quay side, those APIs are incredibly heavy on our database. They are incredibly slow. And since they don't provide usually any information as to what has changed, it results in a problem where as the registry and repositories grow larger over time, the overall operation time slows down for being able to determine updates. Plus, it requires a lot of state tracking on the part of the various clients that would be checking the catalog and tags endpoints because they have to themselves track what's changed since the last time they looked. So the goal of the proposal, as I've stated out, is to basically create an equivalency of a pub/sub solution for registries. This would be an optional extension, ideally supported via VBATS's optional extension proposal, but since I wrote my proposal kind of concurrently with VBATS's one, it doesn't yet reflect that proposal. I have a comment in there. So right now I have it homed under v2/_events, but we probably change that, but that's a minor detail. The basic gist is it would allow what I hereafter declare as a client to register with the registry that it wishes to watch a portion or the whole of events that occur in the registry. And these events would be everything from tag updated, deletion, repository created, deletion, and to be notified via a webhook callback whenever one of those events occurred within the watched subscription space. And then the clients would then be able to take whatever action they want. Index it for security scanning, deploy if it was, provide new UI, send out its own notifications, kind of anything along the gamut. The key aspects of the proposal that I want to highlight briefly are, one, it is a callback approach. We have a slight variant internally of a proposal that made use of WebSockets instead, but it was deemed a little too complex. That being said, if the community finds that a WebSocket-based solution is more useful than a HTTP callback, I'd be happy to change the proposal. I'm not particularly wed to one or the other.
Just for clarification, the big value difference in those two proposals that he's talking about was like a webhook versus WebSocket WebSocket approach is that the WebSockets can traverse like a NAT firewall, so you could have something hand over a WebSocket that is behind a firewall, whereas a webhook would have to be publicly exposed to the registry.
Correct.
So there's benefits and drawbacks to both.
Yes. And then the second big benefit is that it uses essentially a self-subscription model, and I'll describe that briefly, where it's pseudo model, it's all modeled on OAuth, but the idea is that any client could make an API call to the registry and say, hey, I wish to subscribe to notifications for this set or subset of the registry. The registry can then respond with a URL that the tool or the client could redirect the user to approve that subscription, and then the subscription would be created. So this would allow arbitrarily tools to connect to arbitrary registries without having to pre-register a client ID or a client secret. This would all be done and verified using JWTs, so that every call made from the registry to clients and clients to registries would be validated using the other side's published JWTs. It doesn't have to be JWTs. I used it because that's what a lot of REST APIs are using. We can change that, but I wanted to have verification on both sides so that you can't end up in a situation where someone could fake a registry call to a client or someone could fake a client call to a registry. There's a lot of little details around those flows that I outlined in the doc, and I'm sure there's some areas that can be expanded. But overall, the goal here, as I said, is to provide a nice, well-defined standard way for any tool that needs to operate on top of the sum total of tags and repositories and manifests in a registry to be alerted about those changes without having to basically pull. And one final thing I should mention before I kind of open the floor to what I imagine will be a withering level of criticism is there is a built-in component for something we call catch-up. And the idea is this is all well and good once you subscribe to events and events are starting to occur. But what happened if you subscribed and there's been a bunch of pushes or pulls or creations before that point? And so the proposal creates this idea of a catch-up whereby any client that is registering can say, hi, I would like the registry to issue to me a simulation of all the events that have occurred until I've registered, or a subset thereof. And then the registry could then basically puppet those events as a way of having the client catch up to where it would have been had it registered from, time index 0. And the recommendation that I put into the proposal is that those catch-up events would be considered lower priority. This would be an optional thing, so that new events would come in immediately, and then if the registry found that it had some space in the queue, for lack of a better term, it could issue these catch-up events. And also likewise, if a client went offline for a period of time, when it came back online, it could request catch-up from where it was to where it is now. Also, again, as a way of saying, hey, I missed a bunch of events. Can you get me caught back up to where it was? So this, in my opinion, would essentially negate the need for polling, and it would minimize the need to hit the catalog and tags endpoints. They still have value, but I think in my opinion, they should be optional, because any tool that needed a fully global view of a registry, or even just a namespace within a registry, or even a repo, would have the ability to just register as a client of this solution, perform catch-up, and then no further calls would be necessary unless new changes came in.
And Joey, just to clarify, could I say I only care about events from 3 months ago when the registry existed for 5 years?
So the proposal does allow for that. It would depend on whether we want to standardize what the catch-up hash or code is. We could decide to make it a time-based code and make that part of the formal proposal, in which case then, yes, we could. My current proposal doesn't define whether that's registry specific or whether it is a date time. Welcome to suggestions on that. The only reason I didn't make it a date time before was because it means the implementation is a little more complex for registries. Like on the Quay side, we have time machines. That's trivially easy for us to do. But for other registries, it may be harder if they don't keep time information as to when things were pushed. So I don't know. This is where the community really needs to give me some feedback on, like, is having a time-based code too complicated, or is it sufficiently easy to add to all their implementations that we can make it a requirement?
Yeah, I would say that seems ambitious, just to be able to go back before a subscription existed. So if we model it based off how Kubernetes watches work, you get a watch token, and you can reuse that token if you lose connection, which WebSockets often do, and then it will fast forward you all the events since that watch token. But you can't just choose a time before you have a watch token, and those watch tokens tend to expire, I think, around 20 minutes. So we could model it off that, but it seems like the implementation would be kind of hard to have any arbitrary. You'd have to have a time series database, right? And I don't know if everyone will want to implement that.
Do we need, or just need to know the push time and the last tag update time? Because manifests are immutable. So as long as people are storing it, and I'm assuming, I don't know, when a tag is pushed, do we keep track of in UTC on what the date time was of that push?
So as I mentioned, like on Quay, we have this built into our data model. I would be shocked if there isn't a registry implementation out there that doesn't keep track of the date time necessarily. Like things that are based off of like just a flat file space, probably may be able to use the M time on the manifest, but I'm not 100% certain that they would have the time codes. But again, we could make it a requirement of this optional extension and say, if you're not doing that, then you just can't implement this. And then you have to find a way to keep track of this information separately. I didn't want to put that in necessarily because I wasn't sure what the cognitive overhead of doing so was. But if we find that the vast majority of current implementations support some sort of time-based lookup, then yeah, I mean, it makes perfect sense to be able to say, hey, I want to be able to replay not just from the beginning, but from this particular time code, because then it's pretty straightforward to do. So again, this is where community feedback is going to be super important.
Well, also, Joey, because you mentioned like pushes and deletes, right? So if you have a GC component like we do, it would be kind of impossible to get that information.
Past a certain point, yeah. So one thing I should mention on the deletion side, because it can be a little confusing, is from my personal perspective, if a tag has been pushed and then deleted before you subscribe, then the catch-up will not have either of those events because they are inverts. They've basically created a no-op. So for most clients, or for most registries that would implement the proposal, if a tag was created in a repository and then 6 months later that tag was deleted, and then a month after that a subscription came in and said, hey, catch me up, the registry would essentially just look at the current tag list and issue synthetic push events for each of those tags. It would not have to go back and say issue a push and then a delete after that. That's out of band, and I don't think it provides any real value to new clients.
Agreed. What do you do for, because this is the tombstone conversation, what do you do for, I checked an hour ago, 15 tags or manifest, I don't want to get into that debate yet, were deleted. If they're actually deleted, do you track those tombstones specific to my subscription?
So the idea is that when a tag, let's say a tag is added or a tag is deleted, all of the reporting is tracked per subscription, right? So if it was deleted an hour ago and I haven't yet reported it to this particular client, then it's the job of the registry to report those, right? So my guess is the way registries will implement this is they'll keep track of the changes, and then they'll only remove it from their tracking queue once all subscriptions have been caught up. And if they haven't been, then it's up to the registry to either keep that information around indefinitely or to a point where they say, okay, we're not going to support catch-up after a certain point. Again, on the Quay side, we have time machines, so we keep that full set of information for however long the time machine window is. And if a subscription comes in from after that point, we're just going to say, hey, you're too far out.
And I'm already jumping into the detail of the tombstones. I guess I was actually just going to say that. What do people think about this overall? I mean, this has been something we've been talking about for a long time, and Joey actually went and did all the hard work to write this up. I'm trying to see.
So I'm not sure about other registries, but for ECR, we have integration with CloudWatch events. And so a customer can create an event bridge that they subscribe to a CloudWatch event, and then they get notification about image deletion or image push. How is that different from your proposal?
Well, for one, this would be standard, right?
Okay, yeah.
And in fact, my guess is you guys could probably implement this not too difficultly by just basically creating a proxy that sits in front of that event bridge at a multi-tenant place, right? The idea here is that I want to provide, like, again, Quay has webhooks. Like, we provide notifications today when an image is pushed, or rather a tag is pushed and deletions occur. And I'm pretty sure that ACR does the same thing, and I know Docker Hub does the same thing. The idea here is to not fulfill a need that's going unmet, but to do so in a standard way so that if I'm insert XYZ tool, like let's say I'm Spinnaker, rather than calling catalog and tags, I can just implement this proposal and then know it'll work with any registry that supports this optional extension, which hopefully would be the most of them. Because that way we're taking significant load off of the registries and making the tooling better simultaneously.
So an example of this was, we've had ACR for, I don't know, 4 years or something, whatever it is. And if it's not when the others were out, I think ECR was out, maybe GCR, I don't remember. The point is though, when we first came on the scene and we asked the scanners to, hey, support ACR, they were pulling us to death, like, Joe was talking about on the catalog and the tags API. And we said, hey, we have this webhooks implementation, can you use that? And it was different than somebody else's and different than somebody else's. And basically they said to us, like, look, you guys aren't big enough yet. They didn't quite say it, but this is ultimately what they were meaning. We weren't big enough yet for them to care. They weren't going to write special code for us. So what this proposal does is it inverts it. I'll pick on Harbor, and I'm just picking on them because it's on my mind. Harbor's new to the scene, whatever. Should Aqua, Twistlock, and the others have to write code specific to Harbor? Or does the burden just get put back on Harbor if they just implement Joey's, this new distribution spec optional API? Then they do the work, and then they get all the free community or all the scanner community, not for free, but they don't put the burden back on others. That's kind of the model here. And it also, for us registry operators that have to support these things that kill us, it gives us a way to be much more efficient around delivering the information in the first place.
I see. Thank you.
My biggest question is, so if you don't know me, I'm Alec Merdler. I'm also on the Quay team. So I was the one that had the potential idea of WebSocket proposal instead. And it really depends on what the type of clients we're expecting to use, or who would be using this API. Is it reasonable to expect that they would have an HTTP server exposed to the internet to be able to consume webhooks? Or is it more likely that they're clients that would not be running an HTTP server typically and would prefer a WebSocket or some other bidirectional approach?
I was curious if anybody else had some opinions. So we've had webhooks for a while, and it is a challenge because it's like kind of like file system watcher notifications. If you happen to miss just one, that you never trust it again. There's no concept of voicemail. So what Joe and I were talking a little bit about, is there a way to do a durable endpoint that is an extension that could be cloud specific? So for Azure, it'd be, Azure Q Storage, and AWS and others have similar things. Is there a way, an extensibility point that could be done in a standard way that could be efficient, standard, and reliable? I was wondering about the cloud events, but to be fair, I haven't looked at enough of it to know if that's actually applicable or not.
My mind just jumps immediately to like, what are the easiest client tools, libraries, or somebody who's trying to curl an example, and is which one of those bridges that the easiest? And yeah, the publicly exposed webhooks is something of a barrier, but yeah.
And what I was thinking, if we did want a WebSocket interface to this, we could pretty easily write a small open source tool that, it's just a HTTP server that you can run on your infrastructure, and then has a WebSocket, interface instead, and just kind of proxies between that, if that's a demand. But otherwise, I pretty much agree with webhooks being, if we offer this as a solution, client tools will probably figure out a way to consume it.
That's my first step, and that's where, even when I chatted with Joey about it, that webhooks is simpler, and I think more speaks to a lot of the current stuff of like within the Kubernetes space. Like a lot of things are just webhooks, and people are familiar with that. But it would be simpler in a lot of ways for the client, and on the pub sub implementation side. And then the long goal would be, how do you have any kind of library, or like you're saying, open source tool or whatever, but still client library side, where you actually like make the query and then get the request coming in afterwards. Like almost like, I just think of somebody like trying to curl something, how to make that happen. But I'm not truly opposed to either one of them. I just start with the simple one, have the conversation, and evolve it from there.
Yeah, and as I said, we're not wed to one or the other. I just wanted to, stem some ideas, put this out there, and see what everyone's general reaction was. So feel free to add comments. Everyone should have comment ability on the doc, and we'll kind of take it from there. And
Thanks, Joey.
my pleasure.
This is awesome. And I know there's a lot of other people that didn't make the call today that I know are interested. So what's your next step?
Well, one, I want to get some feedback on and see if we're missing anything obvious, because I'm sure there's something in there, right? Maybe some of this tombstoning stuff will require a little bit of a reval on certain things. And then after that, we need to make a decision as to whether webhooks versus WebSockets is kind of like the road forward. And then I was going to start writing a very simple prototype implementation, probably on the Quay side, just because I know that code base the best, and see if it works. That was basically what my plan was.
Cool. Could you do the webhooks versus WebSockets just as a standard extension point, and just though, and maybe the default is webhooks, but you could just as easily swap out webhooks, or you could just as easily swap out, you know, Azure storage queues, or, you know, ECR, the eventing thing that two.
Yeah, we could. I mean, I could rewrite the proposal so that the actual notification and registration is done in somewhat of a generic fashion. The only concern that I have there is that we need to make sure that it's discoverable, and we probably still need to have a default solution, right? So like,
Webhook seems like
webhook seems like the best default, and then maybe we have and I know VBats is about to give me an evil glare, but maybe we have the extension to the extension, where we report that we support webhooks and WebSockets, or webhooks and this events bus, or webhooks and CloudWatch, right? And so then it's extensible for everyone to implement whatever they want, but the standard thing is always, we always support webhooks or something. And Quay would probably do webhooks and WebSockets because they're generic and they work.
Yeah.
Josh had a question. Maybe that can be extracted in its own capability. Yeah, maybe. So for those who weren't reading the chat, he was talking about the JWK auth specification. As I said, I kind of just took that out of the ether because we use it for other things, but I really like the idea of API calls going back and forth between tools always being validated by the other tool's reported key or keys. And JWKs and JWTs seem to meet that need, so long as you do it correctly, like don't trust algorithm less JWTs. So one thing we could do, Josh, is we could definitely define like, if you're writing an extension that's talked from like registry to tooling and vice versa, you always have to use auth this way. And then maybe.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm getting at, is that if some other capability comes along, I'd hate for it to have its own auth system. And so, yeah, I like it.
Yeah, that's actually not a bad idea. And we could even pump that up to the extension level, right? And so, for lack of a better term, we could have two classes of extensions. And if one is a client talking to the registry and vice versa, it could make use of a client JWT or bidirectional JWT thing. And we could bring that into its own proposal and then just say, PubSub uses it, and if we ever add something else, it uses it. Like if we were to add a dedicated security scanning API thingy, we can have that use the exact same auth system. I like it.
Cool, yeah. Looks good.
And that's it for me today.
Sweet.
Thank you, sir. I'm glad to see it finally bubbled up to the list of the group. Next, Brandon.
You've got the extension stuff in the agenda. I didn't even know that. Look at you.
I just tacked it on.
Oh.
Anyhow, Brandon.
A little pressure.
You're next. You want to?
Yeah. Hey, so
conversation around this in the past weeks or so. So thanks for joining the call.
Yeah. So like you just said, so Vincent pinged me on this discussion. So I moved a lot of the content that we had in the image spec PR, and then I moved it to the artifacts. I think the initial discussions here were around having this as either additional MIME type or suffix addition to media types in general. So I've put everything in the PR here. It's basically most of the same information, and then remassaging it for being more generic to artifacts. But yeah, is there any other context that I'm missing on the discussions from this, Vincent?
let me open up your PR. I didn't see that come through. I must not be getting notifications on that repo. I think the only thing that I was wondering about is on the as far as like adding a table, or how some of this stuff was going to work. Yeah, so you pretty much just carried over the document like you had it before, or the
Yes.
thing you had it before. So, which maybe is fine. And this is where I'm curious to see from Steve and some of the other artifacts maintainers of like, is this going to break down into maybe even just like a machine parsable document at some point that has like key value pair of like MIME type and then point to document, or how do we want to handle this? Or is just this kind of document fine, or do you want a table? Or I guess that's some of the precedent that I'm not sure we've set yet on the artifacts repo. So you might be kind of a guinea pig. So thanks for being flexible and moving that over.
Yeah, I'm more than happy to do that. Always fun to be the first.
It seems like you've gone through a lot with this encrypted media type stuff. So, Steve, are you saying something, or can you?
I was trying to figure out, was a PR to the media, to the artifact spec, or I remember us talking, this is the thing we talked about last week, right? Where you moved.
Well, so it's come up a couple of times in a couple of different contexts now. So Brandon and I chatted at the Container Security Summit, but the context of that discussion was more about the TPM, some of the TPM work that's happening and whatnot, so that was secure enclaves and how that works with encrypted layers. And it, I think part of the bigger story made more sense to me that did not before that moment. And like, we should get back to reviewing that conversation because it kind of stalled out in the image spec side. But when we were doing the review last week, was what it was like, oh, this is pre-artifacts discussion. This really ought to be over in artifacts. So Brandon has done the needful since then to make effectively move the PR over to artifacts.
So I was going to spend some time in artifacts this afternoon. I was going to do it this morning also, but what I'm trying to understand here is this one seems, or let me ask the question. Is this how you do encrypted layers specific to a runnable image, or this is how you do encrypted blobs regardless of the media type?
So initially, I think the discussion of this was around container layers. But then I think the conversations back then, we were saying that this should be more generic. So it could be kind of applicable to any type of OCI blob. The current implementations today only handle layers. That's why it's kind of written within that context. But the mechanisms are pretty generic. It's just that I think the idea of how to generically handle the implementation of this has been kind of like the gatekeeper to writing this document to be a generic for config or manifest or anything.
So what I'm trying to wrap my, all right, so your thinking is that any artifact type, whether it be a Helm chart or a runnable image or, singularity, well, so we'll take singularity out of it just for, but other things that want to push to a registry that they could encrypt their blobs.
Yeah.
That's what you're saying? Okay.
Yeah.
So is the flow that, because this is an interesting pivot, like what we've been saying to date is every artifact type owns their layers and they, they're not meant to be necessarily shared, own their blobs. In runnable images, we think of the blobs as have a layer as a meaning because they overlay each other. But what you're kind of getting at is if an artifact type wants to encrypt its layers, its blobs, that here's a pattern for doing it. But wouldn't each tooling for a runnable image, a Helm chart, need to know how to encrypt and unencrypt those blobs?
Yeah, so what we've done is we've implemented, so the annotations contain all the metadata for encryption. So the process of taking a byte stream and decrypting it has been documented in this implementation that we have it currently sitting in the containers repository. So the APIs are all generic. They're not specialized to like a topple or something. It's basically input stream, output stream. In terms of how this could be scoped, this would be a call out from any tool that handles any OCI blob to call into this encryption routine, right? It passes in the set of annotations as well as the blob, and then it gets a blob back.
So I'm trying to think of what the end-to-end experience is like. So let's just take a runnable image for a second. I'm sitting on my laptop. I, do a Docker build. What do I do between the Docker build being the CLI that I'm using and pushing it to a registry that my layers, my blobs get encrypted before it goes into the registry? And then when I deploy it to a cluster, which would, let's just say it's a container D host, how does it know to, oh, this isn't just a runnable image, it's a runnable image that has encrypted blobs, which are represented as layers. How does it de-encrypt them to run them?
Right. So we've done this exercise with a couple of tools. So on the building side, what we do is in the build command, well, not in the build command, but in the push command, we have a additional flag that we introduce into CLI, which specifies the encryption key, which is it's asymmetric, so it's a public key. And so the tool does the encryption of the layers and adds the annotations to the manifest before uploading it to the registry.
So you have a different tool that does the push, that actually adds this encryption on push.
Yeah, so right now we have it as part of the Scorpio implementation upstream. We're also working to put it in Builder. So that's how it's currently being built today. And then once it's on the registry, and then we are doing this on the pool side. So we have configured, and I'll put the links inside the meeting notes. So Containerd and Cryo now have capabilities to specify a key path in which the private keys will be located. And if it actually bumps into a layer that has this particular media type, it's gonna try and decrypt it using those private keys.
Okay. So the way that's why I said this is interesting, because it's a different pivot. What I think you're basically saying is for any artifact type, if you want to encrypt your layers, here's the standard pattern to do it. But each client for that media artifact type would have to support it. Like, it's not really an automagic thing. It's, here's the pattern. Okay, the image runtime spec has adopted this as, cue up Vincent's next topic, an optional component. And the Docker client, the Scorpio client, the Containerd client, all the pieces that work with the runnable images from end to end either are or aren't aware of it, so that when this thing gets pushed to a registry, the layers have a different media type on that layer/blob, and the client of either side knows how to either deal with it or it doesn't. And then if Helm, I'll use that as the next one, if Helm likes that pattern and they want to adopt it, they would do the same thing, but they still have to do it in their tool chain end to end, but at least the pattern is available.
Yep, exactly.
Okay. Is Joey still here? So I'm picking on Vincent just because he's been in the length of these conversations. Is that, you've been on both sides, from the artifact side to obviously what Brandon's talking about. Does that make sense? Am I thinking about that right?
I think so, because this kind of gets into, as far as like, the parts where it could be a little bit tricky is navigating what you were just saying of like what clients should and must do, because pretty much if they pull down something they don't know what to do with, they should fail, and that should not be unexpected. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, I guess what I'm saying is this is a slight pivot. Like, this isn't a new artifact type. It's actually a new type of layer that specific artifacts could implement. And there is a well-known pattern for doing it, but it doesn't come for free. And the tool chain around that artifact type needs to know about it. So what I like about this is it is a different pivot on it. It is a way for us to
and to be fair, it's kind of bridging something that I thought was going to be a slow migration with the artifacts repo, but it's effectively making one of the jumps that Alexa and I have brainstormed for the last little while with like OCI V2 that got all kinds of people excited of like, here's this thing that's, a bunch of chunks to go fetch from different places, possibly the registry. And it's effectively something that clients should know what to do with if they want to use it. So this is kind of like a more practical use case. And Brandon's already done a lot of the work. So it's making that jump of not just pushing a different MIME type, but also layers that clients would want to do with and have a very known process for doing it. So I like the precedent. It's good. I'm good for it.
Adrian, were you going to jump in there?
Yeah. So I mean, one thing I was just kind of wondering, like, my problem with it is, so if I have the encryption and decryption key, I may as well just save. There's no point in putting an artifact anywhere, or I have to like share the encryption keys somehow. And obviously, you're not going to talk about that in the spec. And that tends to be a really difficult problem. And so I was kind of wondering what the use cases are for this, like, and how do you get around the problem of sharing the decryption key?
Yeah, so that's a good question, and that's kind of where most of our use cases come from. Is that basically, at least how I see this is very similar to, it's kind of like the opposite of signing, right? You're using the opposite key on the asymmetric pair. So what we do with this is that there's a way in which we distribute the keys, and we ensure that only particular nodes have access to the key. So this is in the form of an attestation. So this is where the node attestation TPM stuff comes in. So if we are able to have a log or show evidence that basically if a node had a particular attestation that it was given the key and it was delivered in a safe way because it was wrapped with the TPM or whatever. So the current use cases that are implemented here, where the key is on the file system, are kind of like the tip of the iceberg. We are also working with Keylime and Intel to work out more complex scenarios.
Okay. Yeah, actually thinking about it, I guess it makes sense like within a cluster. I see it being more problematic, when you're sort of sharing with like clients or whatever. But like, it would make a lot of sense, I guess, you've got a Kubernetes cluster, you want to store things in a remote registry, but it's sensitive information, I guess. And then any node can pull it. Okay.
Thanks. Yeah, we are not trying to solve the key management problem because that problem is way harder.
Yeah. I was just thinking kind of like, it makes the uptake of this difficult though.
Good.
Thanks.
Well, thank you, Brandon. So thanks for putting that as a PR. I made a few nit comments on it, but pleased everyone review that. We're at time. So the last item that I'd added after the fact, after the meeting had already gotten started, was the extension proposal that a couple of people alluded to. It's very simple. I sat on it thinking about it longer than there's any beef to the proposal itself. The PR's here in the notes, but please take a look at that. It's just a way to do these kind of additive things. It'd be neat if this gets into distribution 1.0, but I'd understand if it doesn't. It should stay additive even if it doesn't make it into 1.0. But that's about all. That was just open for comment if we had time. But so at the top of the hour, thanks everybody for joining. Please add any notes that you see necessary to the doc, and I will see you all online.
Thanks, folks.
Thank you.